It is so good to see each and every one of you. So appreciate you being here this morning. Welcome again if you're visiting with us to the Beltline Church of Christ. It is a pleasure to have you. Hope that you'll come and be with us again at every opportunity that you get. I need you to know that our time together is getting short. I've got about a month left with you, and I'm so thankful for that. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the prayers that are being offered up. And I was in California last week, and I heard those brothers praying for you, and I hear you praying for us, and I think this is what's supposed to happen. We're supposed to be encouraging each other and building each other up, and it's about the kingdom of God, and it's about bringing souls into that kingdom. And so I'm so thankful for the spirit and the encouragement and the comfort that you've given me, and I look forward to seeing what God's going to do not only here, but in California. And man, I just can't tell you how much I love and appreciate every one of you. So as we dive back into our series of lessons now about chasing God, which is really about God chasing us, I just want to make this observation. It seems that we live in a world that worships time. I don't know if you've noticed that, but we seem to. We live in a world that worships time. We live and we die by it. And it seems to me like we cling to our phones and our calendars like a drowning man clinging to a life raft. It's just amazing how much we worship this thing called time. Time seems to be our lifeline to reality. And our preoccupation with time didn't really get carried away, it seems, until about the 17th century. In fact, before then, the world was pretty much ruled by seasons. There was a season to sow. There was a season to reap. There was a season to store. And time was measured in much larger chunks, and people at least didn't appear to be as married to their schedules as they are now. But somewhere along the line, that all changed. The question is, why? Why did that change? And we don't really know. Legend has it that Columbus stepped off of his ship and bought a watch, and things have never been the same since. I don't know if that was true or not. But whatever happened, at some point in time, you and I began obsessing over time. And in our rush to stay on time and make time last, what happens is we begin to lose touch with the moment. We begin to live touch with the present. And it seems to me, if you agree with me or not, we have forgotten how to live in the moment. Can I get something from you on that? I mean, have we forgotten how to live in the moment? And here's the problem with that. When you lose touch with the present, I believe it's there that we lose touch with God. Because it is the present is the only place that God can exist for you. I want you to understand that today. We're going to hit that point again and again and again as we get started. Now, God is the Alpha and the Omega. We know that He is the beginning and the end, all at the same time. We know that we are bound by time, but God is not. In fact, I heard of a seafood restaurant that has a sign in the window that says, "Free crab tomorrow." And to this day, they've never had to serve a free crab leg because it's never tomorrow. And so the bottom line is this: you can't walk with God in the past, and you can't walk with God in the future. You can only walk with Him in today, in the here, in the now. God meets you only in the present moment. And I want that to sink in today. I want that to sink in. God meets us only in the present moment. Now, I'm convinced of something else. I'm convinced that you and I have bought into, hook, line, and sinker, a vicious lie. There is an underlying belief that we have bought into that robs us of our relationship with God. I think this underlying belief, this lie that we have bought, is one of the reasons we struggle so hard to hear from God. It's the reason that sometimes our relationships with family and friends suffer. It's the reason that we create unnecessary stress in our life, and it's what robs us of our hope. This lie, this underlying belief, isn't about our obsession with time, but it has everything to do with our obsession with time. And it isn't about our inability to live in the present, although it has everything to do with that as well. This is a more subtle lie. This underlying belief is always at work within us, and here's what it is. And you tell me if this isn't true. Here's the lie that we've bought. We believe that we are not enough and that we don't have enough. Think about your life. Think about the struggles that you have. And tell me that in some way, shape, form, or fashion, everything that we're dealing with in life comes from this underlying lie that we're not enough and we don't have enough. This fear-based belief causes us to be obsessed with time. It's the reason that we're so preoccupied with our schedules. It's the reason we're so intent on maximizing each hour, each second, each day. It's the reason we're so obsessed with performance and productivity. It drives us to live in the future, and it causes us to be beaten up in the past with regret over the past. We are all dogged by this feeling that we're not enough and we're not accomplishing enough. And this belief that we're not enough and we don't have enough, this lie is what feeds our obsession with time. But it's so ingrained in us, I believe, that sometimes we don't even recognize it. We don't even realize it anymore that this is what we're dealing with. And so let's kind of put together some of the things that we've been talking about. God reveals himself only in the present, but because of our obsession with time, we live constantly in either regret about the past or in fear and worry about the future, and so we fail to live in the present, the only time zone where God makes himself known to us. And I want you to know that God has invested everything. He has invested everything, all that he is and all that he has in nurturing our relationship with him. But we are so caught up in this lie, we're so caught up in ourselves that we don't even notice. We're so focused on what we don't have and what we haven't accomplished that we never take time to see what is right there in front of us. And what is right there in front of us is God himself. In Acts chapter 17, Paul is stirred in the Spirit. We talked about this earlier in this series, as he goes to the city of Athens and he sees all this idolatrous worship everywhere. There's an inscription to this god and that god. There's a statue to this one and that one. There's even the divine question mark, right? The unknown God. And so Paul begins to preach to them about a God they really don't know, a God who's created the world and everything in it, and he doesn't need anything from us, but it says he wants us to find him. And then I love what Paul says, though he is not far from each of us. He's right there with us. He's present in front of us, but we are so bought into this we're not enough and we don't have enough lie that we don't even see it. God has invested everything, all that he has, in nurturing our relationship with him. Now, here's the thing. Our underlying belief that we are not enough and that we don't have enough, it boils down to one thing. It boils down to this thing called ingratitude. It boils down to ingratitude. God has created us in his image. Do you understand the amazingness of that thought? God has created you and he's created me in his image. But what do we want? We want more than that. We want to be more than that. He provides all that we need, yet we spend our lives wanting more and more and more, and we can't stop. Isn't that the story of the Garden of Eden? You know what I would like to know? I would like to know how much time passed from the creation to the fall. I mean, was this a moment of days? Was this a moment of weeks? Was this a moment of years? How much time passed before Adam and Eve gave in to the lie that you don't have enough and you can't accomplish enough, and they fall into the trap and the temptation of Satan? How much time passed? I don't know. But that's the story of the garden, and it's our story today. God longs to live with us in the present, but we can't stop looking to the past. We can't stop looking to the future. God sees you and he sees me as his own personal concern, and he wants this amazing, intimate, one-on-one relationship with us, but we're so hung up on performance. We're obsessing over all the things that we need to accomplish. You know, there's a reason that God, through the psalmist, says in chapter 36, verse 10, be still. Just be still and know that I'm God. Stop all of this nonsense. Just be still in the moment. Recognize I'm here. Recognize I'm yours. Recognize I want you with me. There's a reason God puts that in the text for us. Let me ask you this question. Have you ever tried to carry on a conversation with someone who wasn't really all there? Wow. Every lady's head in the room just went, wow. I mean, I felt the wind from way up here. We know how that feels when they're not really engaged with you, right? They're there, they're present, but they're not really. Maybe they're watching a game, or they're in the middle of this or in the middle of that. It's crazy. But could it be that the way that we address some of the things that we're talking about today is that we find a new way of looking at our lives in the presence of God? That's what I've been trying to do in this series of lessons. Give us a new way of looking at God, our relationship with God. And so I want you to say something with me. I'm going to put it on the screen. I want this to be this which combats this lie that we have believed, that we're not enough and that we don't have enough. And so I want you to say this with me, because I think this is important. And this is how we begin to turn the ship, if you will, and understand our relationship with God is so much different than what we may think it is. And so say this with me. In this moment, I find God. In this moment, I have all I need. In this moment, I find God. In this moment, I have all I need. You know that what we need sometimes in our relationship with God is a jolt of reality. That's what we need. And let me kind of explain to you what I'm talking about by looking at the life of Jonah. I think Jonah is a great picture of the jolt of reality that we often need. Because if anyone ever lost sight of being present with God, it was Jonah, wasn't it? Now, Jonah's book is only 4 chapters long, and 3 of them describe Jonah's struggle to control his own life, to control his timeline. Jonah is either running away from God, running back to God, or running ahead of God. In fact, only 1 chapter out of 4, and it's not even a full chapter, shows Jonah running with God. That's only 25%. And where did all of this running get Jonah? Jonah ends up in the belly of a gigantic fish in the bottom of the ocean. You want to talk about a jolt of reality? There it is. And it was only after marinating in the digestive juices of that giant fish that he chose to step into the present moment and live there. But it was that understanding, it was that realization, it was that moment that saved him, because again, only in the present moment could he walk with God. And then there's Jacob. I don't know what to do with Jacob. Jacob the deceiver, Jacob the supplanter. Jacob is just not a very good guy, at least the first half of his life. It's amazing to me when you look at Jacob, how he lives his life. At one point, he's struggling to control his own destiny. He's searching for a wife. He's scrambling to save himself from his brother Esau. He's working to keep his herds and servants in the right place at the right time. And through it all, to somehow force God's hand into fulfilling his promise, fulfilling his fortune, and fulfilling his family. If you look at the story of Jacob, he's running out of room in his daytimer to keep all of the stuff that he's doing straight. And God just couldn't get his attention. And so he caught him alone one night and gave him a jolt of reality. He wrestled with him from dusk until dawn. You see, God had big plans for Jacob. Through his seed, all the world would be blessed. And I want you to think about this. It's mind-blowing to me that for all of time, God has chosen to call himself the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. This Jacob is an incredibly bad guy, but yet God chooses him as the one who would carry on his name. And if you think he can't use you, you're crazy. But here's the thing. Before God could bless Jacob the way that he wanted to, Jacob needed to learn how to live in the present. That's what the wrestling match is all about. And I'm wondering how many of us need a little wrestling time with God. In this corner, WWE, I mean, I can see it now, right? Pile drivers, all that kind of stuff going on. I don't know. We need this, though, this jolt of reality. We've been conditioned to seeing time in a very specific way. We see time as a line that begins at some point in our past, it runs through today, and then it fades into the distant future. And so many of us look at time and we see it as a train that left the station long ago, and now it's just moving toward the horizon. And some of you, if you're being honest right now, understand that train seems to be a runaway train. It just is moving faster and faster and faster and faster. Now think about what happens when we put the lie that we're not enough and we don't have enough with this idea of time as a runaway train. what happens is we begin to develop a worldview, and I see this worldview everywhere, especially in the church. We see this worldview that says this: you only have so much time to become what you need to become and to attain what you need to attain, so you're going to have to move quickly. You're going to have to move quickly. And we become obsessed with being more and doing more, and then we rush to do it before we run out of time, and never live in the moment. And when we don't live in the moment, what happens? Our relationships begin to suffer. We lose touch with our friends, except some social media click thing. That becomes our friendship area. We lose touch with our relatives and our neighbor. We even lose touch with our spouse and our children. And what also happens is our church meetings begin to feel more like a PTA weekly meeting than any kind of family like God had designed for us. And worst of all, our relationship with God suffers. It becomes fractured. It becomes distant. In the process, the time that we do spend in prayer, see if this isn't you. I know it's been me, especially lately. The time we do spend in prayer is filled with worry about the future, about stress brought on by our overcommitted lives. And our prayers are full of pleas that God would help us be more and do more so that we could attain more. Am I speaking your language yet? That's what our prayers look like. And so the question is, what do we do? What do we do to change this course? How do we begin to fix this? Is there even a fix? And I think it all begins with a change of mind, as Romans 12 talks about. We've got to renew our mind. And the way that we renew our mind is by refusing the myth that we don't have enough and that we're not enough. Because the only time, again, that exists is the present, the here and now, this moment. It is physically impossible to live in any other moment than the present one. And in spite of that, we have been conditioned to think that I want us to be conditioned to think we are enough and we have enough. This is how we begin to refuse and change this and refuse the myth. We live in the now. We remember that we are enough and we have enough. You and I have been created in the image of God. We are His own personal concern. He will and He has provided all that we need, and He promises to continue to do that through eternity. And so again, in this moment, I find God. In this moment, I have all I need. Let that reality sink into your heart today. Some of you are stressed out over what's coming next. Am I going to be able to pay this bill? Am I able to do that? What about my job? What is this? What is that? And then some of you are living in regret of the past. Oh no, how in the world am I going to ever undo what I've done? In this moment, I find God. In this moment, I have all that I need. We all get caught up in the future glory and unrealized expectations. We set our sights so far down the road, so far ahead of us, that we lose sight of what's going on right now in front of us. The writer of Proverbs says in chapter 13 that hope deferred makes the heart sick. And he's right, isn't he? I want to tell you what else prevents us from living in the present moment. It's this thing called regret. I've had a few. I'd sing the song, but you don't want to hear that. Regret often looms over our heads like a rain cloud, constantly reminding us of all the things we should have done, all the times we have wasted, all of our unrealized hopes. We live in remorse over things we've done or failed to do. Disappointment and regret loom large above all of us, and we give them so much unwarranted power in our lives. Our view of time has led us to think of eternity as something in the future. We look at eternity and we say, man, that's some grand blessing that's going to come at the end of life. But can I challenge that thought for a second? Because what is eternity? Isn't eternity living with the eternal one? I mean, isn't that what eternity is? Eternity is living with God. And I can do that today. I can do that in this moment. I can live with God today. I can be fully alive in His presence moment by moment. And so God longs for us to be fully engaged with Him, fully focused on our relationship. He longs for us to step out of our limited space and into sacred, eternal space. In God's presence, you are enough. And in God's presence, you have enough. I want you to go with me to the book of Ezekiel. We'll finish with this today. I know you don't know where that is, so take some time, look in the front if you need to, and turn to Ezekiel. But this is an incredible section of Scripture that I think speaks directly to what we're talking about today. In ancient times, God created a nation to call His own. He created a people He named Israel. And the story of Israel is the life story of a people who are loved by God, who are protected by God, and who are nurtured by God. That is the story of Israel. And in it is the story of Israel is also a story of a people who choose to reject the love of God. And so in many ways, reading Israel's story is like reading our own. Like we talked about Hosea and Gomer last time, remember? God worked tirelessly to win back Israel's love every time she chose to follow after other gods. And we look at Israel and we say, how in the world were they so crazy? And it's so easy for us to judge Israel's fickleness. But how different are we? In those silent moments when the truth slaps us in the face, we recognize we are exactly like them. Like you and me, Israel was born a little naive. Like an infant, she was helpless. She was unsuspecting. She was immature. And so God comes along and nurtures and cares for her as He watched and waited for her to get to a point where He could enter into covenant with them. And this is what we have in Ezekiel chapter 16. Listen to this. This is somewhat graphic, but I think it's important for us to read together. Verse 4. And as for your birth, on the day you were born, your cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water to cleanse you, nor rubbed with salt, nor wrapped in swaddling cloths. No eye pitied you to do any of the things to you out of compassion for you, but you were cast out on the open field. You were abhorred on the day that you were born. And when I passed by you and saw you wallowing in your blood, I said to you, in your blood live. I said to you, in your blood live. I made you flourish like a plant of the field, and you grew up and became tall and arrived at full adornment. Your breasts were formed, and your hair had grown, and yet you were naked and bare. And when I passed by you again and saw you, behold, you were at the age of love. I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness, and I made my vow to you. And I entered in to covenant with you, declares the Lord your God. Listen, and you became mine. Like a baby struggling to grow, there was Israel, helpless before the world. And as she fought to survive the growing pains of life, struggling through the many stages of infancy, God continued to watch her, continued to nurture her. Time and again and again and again, He passed by, waiting for her to reach the age for love. And when He saw that she had matured, He took her in. I made my vow to you, He says, and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord God, and you became mine. Now, Israel's growth to maturity was a long and it was a painful, painful process. We know that Israel endured numerous seasons of sorrow and tragedy, times of rebellion and disillusionment, moments of suffering and loss. Like you and me, she wasn't born into awareness. She had to grow into it. She had to be nurtured into the fullness of life. And only then could God bring her under His covenantal wing. Because only when we reach the age for love can we fully give our hearts to another. And this expression, age of love or age for love, it's an interesting thing. It was coined by the prophet Ezekiel, and people have been striving to understand what it means ever since. And so we want to be mature enough, aware enough, and prepared enough to be captured by love. That is what the text is trying to say to us. But how and when we reach the age of love isn't necessarily what you and I might expect. In Luke 7, there is an event that took place when Jesus was eating at the house of Simon the Pharisee. And while they dined, a sinful woman brought a flask of fragrant oil and began to anoint Jesus' feet with it. We know the story, right? We've preached on that very story on different occasions here from this pulpit. We know that the woman washed his feet with her tears. She wiped off the dirt with her hair, and she kissed those feet over and over and over. It was an act of complete humility on the woman's part. And most of us are familiar with Jesus' response in Luke 7. Her sins, which were many, have been forgiven. Hence, she has shown great love. Now, don't miss the powerful truth in this statement, or you miss the whole story. Jesus was not describing a woman who had come to him out of remorse, who had come to him out of regret for her sins and shamefully knelt at his feet, hoping against hope for a measure of mercy. That is not what's going on in Luke chapter 7. Some translations have skewed the meaning of this passage by changing the verb tense, but the Greek gives us the clearest picture of all. Jesus speaks in the past tense. Her sins, which were many, have been forgiven. That is why, hence, she has shown great love. You see, something happened to this woman before she arrived at Simon's house. Now, we're not told what happened, but clearly her guilt was already behind her. Her sins, which were many, had already been forgiven. And she came to Jesus not out of guilt or remorse, but out of love and gratitude. It was only after she realized how much she had been forgiven that she was able to humble herself and show this amazing act of love to Jesus. Hear me now. It wasn't her sinful past that brought her to the age for love. It was an understanding of what God had already done with her past that brought her to the age for love. Are you following me at all? Because the distinction between these two things is amazingly important and critical. You see, the age for love is not something we arrive at simply through the passage of time. It's a state of mind we come to when the reality of God's forgiveness finally hits us. We reach the age for love when we realize the enormity of God's story and what it does to your and I's story, our story. It's when we understand the depth and the breadth of God's grace and what it means for our lives. Some of you have been in the church your whole life. You still haven't reached the age for love. I'm begging you today. Don't let that be you. While God is nurturing us, He's also waiting for us to reach full maturity. He wants us, like Israel, to reach the age for love. This is a common thread throughout the entire Bible. Isaiah 44, return to me, for I have redeemed you. This is what God's already done. Israel had been living apart from God, completely disengaged from the relationship. Like Gomer last week, they had given their hearts to other lovers, yet God never turned His back on her. In His eyes, she was already redeemed. And that's the story of Ezekiel 16. If you were to read on that entire 60-plus verse chapter, what you would find is, after God spreads His covenantal wing over Israel, she starts running off to other lovers, just like Gomer. Sacrificing children, doing all kinds of crazy things. And then you come to the end. You come to Ezekiel chapter 16, and you look at verse 59, and it says, I will deal with you as you have done. You have despised the oath in breaking the covenant, yet I will remember my covenant with you in the days of your youth, and I will establish for you an everlasting covenant. He says, I know what you've done. I love you anyway. Come home. Come home. 1 John chapter 4, verse 19. We love because He first loved us. You see, please hear me today. We don't find acceptance through a life of dogged obedience. Contrary to what the church has said for generations, that is not where we find the acceptance of God. Is obedience important? Of course it is, but that's not the point. We live in obedience because of what Jesus has accomplished, has made us accepted already. This fundamental shift in thinking has to happen in our hearts. We love God because He loved us first. We don't love in an attempt to earn His love. And we know we've arrived at the age for love when we finally realize the magnitude of His love and the compassion and the forgiveness that God has already extended to us. He's already extended it to us. It's also when we finally understand the story is not about what we can do, but about what God has already done. And when you finally get to that point, you can truly give your heart to God. We once wondered if God's story was big enough to cover our mistakes. Now we know that our sins and our mistakes and our failures have long since been covered. Now we know and understand what it means to be God's own personal concern. And if that's you today, then you are now ready to embrace the romance. You're now ready to open yourselves fully to the courtship of God, who has been nurturing you from day one until where you are right now. You're finally ready, if that is you today, to accept His proposal of marriage with eyes wide open. So will you? Will you accept that proposal? Will you give your life to the one who's already given His life to you and for you? Will you enter under His covenantal wing and be the person He's designed you to be? I hope that you will. And if you need prayers, if you need to start your walk with Jesus today, to step over that line of faith, to enter into those covenantal relationships, I pray that today will be the day you obey the gospel and give your life to Jesus fully and completely. If we can help you with that, we want to do that. Whatever we can do. In the name of Jesus, come while we stand and sing this song for your encouragement.
Now I heard an old